the cloud. Welcome to the Georgia Tech Business Network CEO Spotlight Series. I'm Jay Schaefer. I'm the GTBN co-chair of events, along with Roshni Ramaswamy. GTBN's mission is to provide a link with Georgia Tech community and the Atlanta and beyond business people. And who doesn't want to make more Georgia Tech business connections? We're delighted today to have two of Georgia Tech's recent 40 under 40 honorees, Garrett Langley, CEO of Flock Safety, and Seth Radman, CTO of Infinite Giving, who will share their insights during the next hour. So before we start, I want to let people know for questions, please use the Q&A, not the chat or raise your hand. We want to make sure we get all the questions at the end, and we're going to reserve at least 10 minutes or so for questions, but we want to make sure that we get the conversation from Garrett and Seth going. And before we do that, let me just say about Seth. When Seth was a student at Georgia Tech, he started not one, but two startups. And one of them, Crescendo, was acquired by Ultimate Guitar. And during COVID, Seth and a fellow musician founded a company called Upbeat App, which allows musicians, choirs, other people who are virtually to perform live together in sync on Zoom, which is pretty cool. And now Seth is the CTO of Infinite Giving, which is a platform that allows nonprofits and their donors to invest money more productively, which will launch, let me check my notes here, tomorrow. So Seth, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us, and please take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. I appreciate you having us. So hey everyone, I'm Seth. I appreciate that intro, Jay. That was great. Really, I'm excited to chat a little bit with Garrett. It's not every day that you get to chat with someone who is in less than 4 years built a company from nothing to over $1 billion company. Not only that, but one that is doing a lot of good. If you haven't heard of Flock Safety, they recently had, it was 150 million Series E, I believe, right? Led by Andreessen Horowitz. They've blown past unicorn status. And it's a surprisingly simple but effective product that records license plates and vehicles in a database to help reduce crime. And just to give you an idea of the magnitude of the impact, I think if I recall correctly, 1 out of every 100 arrests in the US this year will be from a Flock camera. Is that right?
2.5% now.
Wow, you've already gone up. That's
yeah.
Crazy. But anyways, Garrett, thanks so much for joining me. I'm excited to chat about stuff. But just to start out, tell us a little bit about why you decided to start Flock.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question because people assume I have some long history in public safety, criminology, were your parents police officers, and it's a pretty classic, I think, Georgia Tech story of like, I'm an engineer who likes to solve problems. And about 4 years ago in my neighborhood here in Atlanta, there was a really big rash of car break-ins. Like one weekend, 100 cars get broken into. It's like clearly organized crime. And the engineer said, like, engineer in me was like, why is this happening? And the major, from the police department was like, well, file your insurance claim. That's really all we can do. And it was surprising to me because you watch NCI or, shows, and you're like, oh, where's the fingerprints? And like, where's all this like hard work? And he said, look, like, you got to have something to do. Like, you got to have an action, like a first step. Like if you're in sales, you got to have a phone number, an email.
Right.
Like, I can't just say, hey, Seth, you need to go close this account. I'm like, well, do you have any contact for them? Do you have anything for me to get started? And so he told us, like, you need license plates. It's the #1 most effective piece of the puzzle. And so we went to go procure that product for my neighborhood, and it was about $250,000 proposal from the company. And we are in Buckhead, sure, maybe we could afford it. Like, it'd have been a pretty big capital campaign. And I just said, like, hold on. You're telling me that I can buy this brand new iPhone, the iPhone 13 Pro or whatever it is, for $1,000, but some magical device that can read a license plate is $40,000? Like that, the engineer in me could not reconcile it. And so that was kind of the beginning of like, well, let's go see if we can build a better widget. So I called 3 other Georgia Tech friends of mine and said, like, hey, let's just build this for my neighborhood. Like, I don't think this is a business. This is just like, let's do it. And I'll never forget the morning I got a call from Detective Yimmer in DeKalb County. And because we had put a couple of these up in like our friends' neighborhoods too, because they had heard that we were like building these things. And he called to thank me for building the camera. And I don't know, Seth, like in your prior businesses, how often you get thank you calls from customers.
Yeah,
It's not
maybe
that often.
very,
Like,
very, very rarely.
that you're spending money with them. And he was like, we made an arrest yesterday afternoon due to your cameras. I just want to call you to thank you and to see if you had any brochures, because I'd love to tell other neighborhoods. And I was like, huh, it worked. Like, oh God, like this little thing we built, it was actually quite large at the time, this large thing we built on my dining room table is now all of a sudden solving crimes. And that was really the point to where the group and myself said, all right, this is real. Like we should really go after this.
That's awesome. So you started with this realizing that, hey, I'm not going to pay all this money for this expensive thing. I have my, cameras. We should be able to use regular computer vision and do that. So what does the product look like today?
Yeah, a much better version of that widget. So, for the engineers joining us, the two big, maybe three big innovations on the technical side. One was realizing that smartphones from a supply chain perspective had dramatically reduced the cost of high-end cameras. Like the iPhone camera is better than most DSLRs. It's better than most other image sensors you can get. So if you can get a 1 or 2 year old iPhone or Android, it's actually a quite nice camera, and it's going to be $50 to $100 on BOM. That was really interesting. The second thing was, to your point on computer vision. Computer vision has dramatically become more accessible in the last few years to where your average engineer can build a pretty good model. It's like that was really unique. And then the third thing was, I only charge my iPhone once a day. And there was this realization that we could actually remove the infrastructure requirements. We could run on solar because we could use, a low power model, pretty much a Snapdragon chipset on our carrier board, our own LTE. We could rebuild a cell phone in a box. And so if you go today, we've got about 1,400 cities we work with. And I've got a camera in my front yard. If Seth, you unfortunately stole a car and you drove by my house, within about 7 seconds, APD, Atlanta Police Department, would be notified in real time that this stolen car, that's a blue Tesla, just drove by this camera, go pick them up. And that notification is going to go actually on software we've built to the nearest officer. So our software also runs in the patrol vehicle. So it's a pretty cool, that's how you get to 2.5% of all arrests in America, is when you can provide that much actionable and objective evidence to law enforcement.
So I'm sure a lot of people are thinking about this. Obviously, privacy is a big concern, right? That you're equipped with a very powerful database that I'm sure is encrypted at rest, but even so, there's a lot that you have to take into account. I guess just to start there, you mentioned that you integrate with patrol officers, and I think I read that you integrate with the FBI. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your relationship with them and how that all works.
Yeah, so there's an interesting argument. People often ask the privacy question, and I think about it a little bit differently because I spend all day thinking about it. I think there's a privacy question and then there's an ethical question. I think the privacy question of data capture is quite unnecessary, because the data that's captured by Equifax, all the credit unions, Facebook, Google, is actually about you as a person and what you do. That, and in those cases, you can't even opt out, right? Like you can't. It's pretty. Google, you can use DuckDuckGo. There's some options, but you're going to use the internet. Everything about you is being tracked. Mm-hmm. When you look at Flock, we actually don't know who's in the car, nor do we care. All we care about is that this car was stolen. It should be pulled over. I was actually meeting with an interesting customer yesterday in Colorado, and they were explaining how actually there's this person who has an outstanding warrant, but he only drives the car at night, and they pulled over his wife by accident yesterday because she was driving in the day, and they're like, oh, we're not interested in you. And then it gets back to they don't actually know when he is going to be there. So the privacy question is less interesting. On that same point, we only retain data for 30 days. It's encrypted both at rest and in transmission, and then it's completely wiped after 30 days. So it's the question is often oh, but someone could use it to track their ex-partner. And I'm like, there are 1,000 better ways to do that. If that's what your goal is, our system's quite, ineffective at that. And then I think the second question that people often ask is well, what's the ethical ramification of a more productive police department? We often will see that a city will have anywhere from a 50 to 60% reduction in crime. They'll double what's called their clearance rate, which is the likelihood of getting arrested if you commit a crime. So today, the national average is about 17%. So For those of us who took statistics at Tech, it means that if you're in the upper quartile of criminals, like you're never going to get caught because the average has got a 9 out of 10 chance of getting away with it, 8 out of 10 chance. So we then asked the question of like, what are the ethical ramifications of having a product that is driving a more active police force? And the way that I think about it is humans are inherently biased. Some of that unconscious, some of that conscious, hopefully mostly unconscious bias, but still conscious. We unconscious. We grew up in a house that had biases. We grew up in a culture that had biases. The goal of this company is to push as much objectivity in law enforcement. And so what I love about what we do is today, a patrol officer is going to drive around without flock and just look for something suspicious and go act on it. That's like incredibly subjective, but that's all they have available today. With flock, if you go to a place like Sandy Springs, who's a customer, we have hundreds of cameras in neighborhoods, hundreds of cameras from the police department. They don't just go around looking for suspicious activity. The flock camera says, hey, this car is stolen. Hey, there was an amber alert. Hey, there's a silver alert. Go do something. And so we're pushing that subjectivity to the last minute, which I think just creates a better relationship between the police department and the citizens they're tasked to protect.
And it's really interesting that I'm thinking of intersections that have that have cameras that have captured license plates and cars and faces, right? Like we always see in the movie. For years, you're intentionally actually obfuscating that. You're removing that so that it is not based on the people. It is purely based on the vehicle.
Yeah, that's our perspective. Is like there is a way. Founders Fund is an investor in our company, and Peter Thiel one time said to me, like, people make false decisions when they assume you can't have your cake and eat it too. And I believe for a company like Flock, our goal is actually to reduce crime and increase our civil liberties at the exact same time. Like that, there's a path, like, or at least you should assume that it is possible, and therefore you should make decisions of trying to drive that versus saying, oh, there has to be some trade-off. Like I don't think there has to be.
And so it sounds like that probably leads directly into one of the core questions that I'm sure is a lot on people's minds. But I know you mentioned that some organizations like ACLU think this is an invasion of privacy, and that can lead to increased injustices against underrepresented minorities. How do you respond to that? What's your opinion there?
Yeah, the main thing is just around communities. If you look at our demographic data of who buys the product, you'd be shocked, I think, that there's a natural assumption that this is for affluent gated communities. And like the data just doesn't back that up. I think the average household income of our customer is like $65,000 a year. That's a lot less than your average Georgia Tech grad. That's for sure. And I think if you get back to it, most of our customers buy this because they want a safer community. We've got a great example in Nashville where the community actually did a yard sale to raise money to buy the product, to show their police department, like, we want you here and we want to be safer. Like, we want you to actually, like, I own a home in this community. I'm not the one that's out there breaking into cars. Like, I want them out of my neighborhood. I want them out of my community. So from our experience, there's a national rhetoric, which the ACLU, that type of group, tries to push. And then there's a much more local level of, you can talk to people that actually live in those homes, live in these neighborhoods, my neighborhood included, where it's like, yeah, there's one or two people that might have issues with it, but everyone agrees they don't want crime in their neighborhood. So it's like, all right, let's talk about the solutions then.
That makes sense. So I'm assuming that you have some data that shows that Flock has positively impacted overall crime stats. Do you have any data on the overall crime reduction and the impact you've been able to make?
Yeah. So in some of our best examples are, there's a town in Southern California called San Marino. If anyone's from LA or lives in LA, maybe they've heard of it. It's a 20 or 30,000 person town. And they put the Flock cameras in. And a year later, I was checking in on the account, and he was like, Garrett, I thought this was going to be productive, but entering autos, so stolen cars, residential burglaries, is down 72%. And I was like, okay, but chief, like, you can't really accredit that to us, right? Causation and causing. He said, look, Garrett, I'm not a research scientist. I'm a chief of police, but I went in front of my city council and said it. So that's at least my opinion. And I live and breathe this stuff. And so what we find is that we drive a ton of efficacy very quickly, where every crime gets solved. Just like you and I, criminals use Instagram. They all of a sudden see that person they followed, who was, the top of the food chain, is now in jail. And you stop committing crimes. So that's one example, but you go to other places, like I was in Colorado yesterday, and I was talking to the mayor of Bomar, Colorado. It's a great customer of ours. You've probably never heard of it. Either had I until, I met the mayor. And he said that the prior year before installing Flock, they averaged about 1 to 2 package thefts a week. So it's a pretty small town. They haven't had one in the last 18 months since putting Flock cameras throughout the city. And I'm like, look, whether I caused it or not, all I know is like the data is there, and
It's a positive
that mayor
impact.
and those citizens have a fundamentally better quality of life. So that's our goal for every city we work with. Some are bigger and have more challenges, and it takes a little bit longer. But for our average town that we work with, 50 to 250,000 people, they see dramatic results overnight.
That's incredible. And I want to clarify one thing, because I think some people might have this misconception that the purpose of what your tool is to help arrest more people, right? But in reality, it's really not. Your goal is to deter people from committing crime in the first place. Can you tell us a little bit more about kind of your perspective there?
Yeah, at Flock, we all view the population of criminals, at least population of criminals, is there's 2 types. There's a very, very, very small subset of criminals who are truly monsters, right? These are people that are committing violent crime against strangers. That's been happening for thousands of years. We're not focused on them. We want to hold them accountable, but we can't prevent that. If you look at the majority of criminals, though, it's crimes of opportunity. I'm going to break into your house because I'm pretty sure I'm going to get away with it. I'm making a Boolean decision of a 0 or 1. I'm not going to get caught. I'm going to go do it. And so if you look at the primary research, our mission at Flock is to eliminate crime. I don't think opportunistic crime should exist. It doesn't have to, because if you look at the research done by academics, there is a direct correlation between clearance rates and likelihood you'll get arrested and the amount of crime that happens. And so we look at it as like, okay, step 1 is capture as much objective evidence as possible. Step 2, like make it in a consumable fashion for your average patrol officer who's 22 to 27 years old. And step 3 is like make those arrests. And then what happens is you look at the data and you're like, oh wow, like we have the crime has gone down. These people have moved on to something else. And so we talk about arrests because it's very easy to show that, like, look, it's 2.5%. It's a pretty significant number. The end result, though, always leads to a reduction long term.
And that's the goal, right? To reduce crime, right? So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. I want to, as Jay mentioned, I am a CTO at a startup, and so there's always the inner geek inside of me. I want to shift a little bit to technology and learn a little bit more stuff there. I'm sure you've thought of this, and I'm sure you have a solution. But what happens if I want to be smart and I go ahead and take the license plate off my car? Is your system still able to track me?
I wouldn't use the word track. Are we able to still solve the crime?
Yes.
The short answer is yes. Our system is a generic camera that happens to read a license plate, but we're picking up what we would call a vehicle fingerprint. So that's 24 different unique characteristics of a car that can be tied back together. So we're looking for damage, roof racks, spoilers, bumper stickers, any aftermarket changes, the color, the make, the model, the year, everything. So the license plate is quite important. And I've got thousands of cases where someone, not like you, a criminal who thought they were smart, took off the license plate, went and did something, put it back on and drove off. But most criminals aren't that spontaneous. They typically are going to case an area. So they'll typically case an area with their license plate on. And so a good detective goes, great. They can effectively click a single button and it says, find this same car, but when it had a license plate. And we'll search across the entire network of cameras and say, this is the exact same car, but this time it has a plate on it.
That's awesome. Now,
it's a cool computer vision model.
Yeah, 24 items. That's crazy to be able to looking at bumper stickers and damage. I guess modern technology has made things so much easier in the past 5 years that we can now run machine learning locally and all kinds of things that make this a lot easier. So I want to dive in a little bit more about the privacy of stuff. Obviously, you're using best practices. You're encrypting data at rest and in transit. What about things like customer support? If someone calls in, asking for help or they want to have footage, do you have access to those videos? Do you you mentioned 2 sides. I guess I'm curious from a legal perspective. It sounds like you're simply their custodian of their data. But what about from a technology standpoint? Could you actually view that data if you wanted to?
No, so you talk about data breaches, and we're in the camp that we think humans are the most dangerous part of our operation. They're definitely the most easily persuaded or hacked. And so none of our employees have access to customer footage. Now we have access to the last picture taken by the camera. So to your point from a customer support, if a customer calls and said, hey, I don't think my camera is working, then a customer support rep can say, well, I'm looking at the last footage and, oh yeah, it appears that it is, covered in snow, or it is, a tree has grown into the view of the camera. So we have that ability just to very quickly say like, yes, something does look broken. And we're going to go roll a truck to go fix that camera. But yeah, I mean, our philosophy is like, no one should look at our customers' footage. We are simply the custodian. We house the data, we manage the data, we purge it at that 30-day period, but it's not our responsibility to do anything.
And
So,
this is something that's really important because that makes you very different from one of your largest competitors. Can you tell us a little bit about Vigilant and kind of their approach?
yeah, so I think that for us, I'm just a regular civilian, and so when we thought about building the company, we wanted to focus on like, what is the best way to build a product like this? And I get the question all the time, oh, could you monetize your data set? Could you sell this to marketing companies? Because we probably could tell you what are the most popular cars on the street right now, right? Like we have enough cameras, we have enough data. We could probably sell you like how long someone owns a certain type of car, all these things. We could tell you about traffic flow, congestion. And our philosophy is like, look, and you're a startup guy, like focus is everything. And our focus is on crime. So remove the ethical part. And it's like, I don't have time to deal with another product. I got to focus on crime. And then you layer in the ethical piece of like, man, why are we having to monetize this data set? Why can't we just build a high enough quality product that serves its job and build a business off of that? So the majority of the incumbents in the space have really tainted the pool and have built a big business off of the sale of the data. And I think that's just a bit of a shame because it's ruining Peter Thiel's point of like, we can do both. They have taken a different approach of like, oh, let's remove all the civil liberties. Let's become a massive data play. And I think that's a shame.
And I'm so thrilled to hear that you're doing that. I'm a big security geek and I'm always paranoid about stuff. I don't even have Alexas in my home because I'm just terrified that they're always listening to me. And so I think that maybe that's a shortcut that some other companies have tried to take, that people are just aware of how data is being used now. And I was just reading the other day that this is kind of scary, but Gmail has stopped scanning your emails. If you didn't know that they were scanning your emails, they've been scanning Gmail. And the reason that they've stopped scanning all your emails is because they've said that they now have enough data in their database to understand every archetype of humans that exist, and they don't need any more data. And so that was terrifying to know that they have that, and terrifying to a lot of people who didn't know that, yes, they previously were scanning all that. So I'm glad that you've taken that approach. And I like the mindset of, there's legal side of things, but there's also the ethics of what you're doing and what's right. And that's not in line with the mission that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, I mean, we at Flock, I think the largest employee resource group is young parents. I've got 2 small kids, and we talk a lot about like, hey, let's assume this company is going to be wildly successful. Are we going to be proud of what we've built? And I think you've been fortunate to work on products that are like very cleanly like awesome and fun, which like kudos to you. We've entered into a business that's quite questionable of will the end outcome be something we're proud of? And so we view that as actually a core responsibility. The products, the policies, the people we hire impact hundreds of millions of people's lives. And we got to do it right. Like we can't make a mistake. And I take that as a pretty heavy responsibility. And some days I wish like, why did I start this business? I wish I was running a marketing company that sold technology to marketers. That seems so easy in principle, maybe more competitive, but not a lot of the heavy stuff we deal with.
No, absolutely. I do think, most companies have those kinds of challenges that they face. Obviously, yours are much different on a different level. Like for us with Crescendo, the whole ethical side was, are we accidentally replacing music instructors, people whose livelihood depend on teaching music, right? And now with Infinite Giving, it's a similar thing in terms of investments, but obviously having someone incarcerated is much different than someone moving between jobs.
But I think you bring up a good point though on the ML side of the machine learning, which is one of the best things we had in terms of a recruitment ability is for people who are into AI and computer vision. It's like, come work on something that like really makes an impact.
Yeah.
Don't go work on Google image search, which is a quite cool product. I love it. I use it a lot of days. Work on something that like is changing the world for the positive. But don't get it wrong, because that wrong result can lead to, a traffic stop for the wrong person.
Yeah. Now, when I first introduced you, I kind of blew past something that is just an incredible achievement that in what, it's been 4 years since you started the company, maybe a little bit more. And you guys have already raised over $230 million. You've grown, you're expecting to be at 350, 400 employees by the end of this year. Tell us about some of the challenges that you experienced early on. And then I'm also curious to hear about some of the challenges you've faced with some growing pains as you've scaled the company.
Yeah, plenty of challenges, that's for sure. For the first 2.5, probably almost 3 years of the business, no one believed this was a good idea or it was a worthwhile investment. Yeah, so here's the challenge, right? Most venture capitalists are self-classified as pattern matchers. The last company to go public that was focused on public safety was a company called Axon. They started in 1999. And sorry, that's when they went public. So it's a 30-year-old company. That's not good, right? Like that causes all types of red flags for an investor to go, wait a second, this market must be tiny. Wait a second, this market must not matter. And my counterintuitive point was like, no, it's just entirely underinvested. Like no one has chose to tackle this problem, and we can be a monopoly. That means we only have 2 competitors. Like that's it. Motorola and Axon are the only 2 publicly traded companies that are truly playing in our space. And I think that's a great thing. Now, what we had to prove very early on, and it took us, like I said, a couple of years, was that like we could build a multi-billion-dollar company, and no one believed us. We struggled quite a lot from a fundraising perspective early on, because it was weird, right? We were a hardware company. That's an X. We were based in Atlanta. Now, COVID's made that easier, but at the time, being based in Atlanta was another X. We sold to public safety and neighborhoods. That's an X. So like before we even got to the first pitch, 80% of investors are like, oh, I don't do government. I don't do hardware. You're not based in the Bay. I'm not interested in talking to you. Yeah. Now, the benefits of scale, the benefits of COVID are, we did our Series C and our Series D entirely over Zoom. And I think that's awesome. Someone who likes living in Atlanta and doesn't want to have to fly to San Francisco to raise money, it's been pretty incredible. So that's like from my side, most entrepreneurs have a really bad patch in terms of fundraising and company performance. And we definitely had like a good 12-month chunk where it felt like nothing was working. And then you just find that magic, that figurative lightning in a bottle, and you just try to keep it locked up as long as you can.
So I want to dive into that a little bit more. I've always struggled with the whole grit or quit question, right? Where, we both went to Georgia Tech, and, we learned that good engineers know how to solve great problems and persist, but they also know when to abandon bad ideas.
Yeah.
So for 12 months is a long time to keep pushing with something and not see results. I'd say the average person would probably have given up much sooner because they think, oh, clearly this isn't working. When you had all that doubt and uncertainty, just not seeing results, what kept pushing you to keep trying things?
Being stubborn. Like, it's so interesting because I remember distinctly, I was at a board meeting. We had one investor on our board. So I'd say board meeting, like this was a small conversation. And I said, hey, I think we should, take a slight pivot in the business to focus on, selling to both neighborhoods and municipalities. And it was a big debate, right? Because it was like, wait a second, we invested in this business doing this. That's going pretty well. It's not going bad. It's going well though. You're tripling the business. You're growing the business by 5x annually. And I said, yeah, I know, but I think we can build a much bigger business if we do both. And the investor time was like, fine, like, let's just cap the investment. Like, I think we had raised $17 million to date. And I was like, yeah, let's just cap it at a couple $1 million, maybe 90 days. Give me 90 days to go test it. And like the results were total crap. Like we couldn't build real pipeline. We couldn't close deals. We couldn't crack the go-to-market. But I just kept coming back to, for me, like nothing that I had learned in the market changed my core hypothesis, which was the business that owns the police department, the business that owns the neighborhoods, owns the entire city. And that is an incredibly defensible position. My whole argument was I can build a much bigger moat, not a product moat, because I don't think product moats are very defensible. This is a business model moat that's going to be so hard to replicate that if we get it right, I think it's really worthwhile. And so, yeah, I mean, it was 12 months of like no pipeline, very few deals being booked. And then we started to see traction. And I was like, like we tried, 6 different go-to-market motions, sales tactics, pricing, all the different variables. But for me, the reason why I stayed stuck to it is like, I didn't learn anything that decreased my conviction in that core hypothesis. I was having a hard time figuring out how to sell to government because I'd never sold to government before. And then we brought on, like, we got enough traction to bring on a new sales leader, because I'm not a great sales leader. And man, it is now, a very, very different story. So
was there one key moment throughout that process where things finally clicked and you realized, man, this is going to work?
Yeah. I'll never forget, I went to, it had been the Q4 board meeting of 2019. So I guess 2 years ago from, a couple months from now. And I told the board that I now know that every time I get on the plane, I'm going to come back with at least $40,000 of ARR. I was like, it's that predictable now. And now, like, I haven't proven how to get other people to have that performance, right? Like, I haven't built a massive sales organization like we have now where they see some results. But I was like, literally, guys, I go to LA every week and I come back with $40,000 in ARR. It's working. What we had figured out was we had originally had a strategy of very much the classic SaaS SDRs, AEs, all cold outbounds, all phone. It's just blanketing a massive market. And we had very quickly realized, like, that for this business, it was much more about word of mouth and relationship sales. So you had to be in market, you had to be doing door-to-door type sales and building very strong relationships. And so we switched from that SDR model to, like, I'm just going to go fly to LA every single week. And it was tiring. But we had another one of my guys, Bailey, he focused on Houston. And it was like, man, every single time Bailey and I do a trip, we come back with contracts, like, and they're getting bigger. And so that was that turning moment. Was like, man, this is super predictable. And yeah, we do need to go build a sales organization. We got to train people, but there are a lot of smart people, like our current CRO, Alex. Like, once we could give him that, and we hired him and said, look, there's a playbook here. We just need you to go, like, print it times 100 sales reps. It's not an easy job, but like a job that he could do. He did that, and then obviously the rest is history.
That's a great story. So I'm curious, did you pivot at all, or have you stuck with the kind of original concept and idea that you've had since the very beginning? Because most companies, they go through a discovery phase, they realize they're wrong. Slack started off differently. We've heard of all these companies, but it sounds like you kind of nailed it on the head to start, and then you just fought through, some challenges.
Yeah, we got very lucky that if I pulled up, I think it was like Project Flock at the time. So we had like our internal, like, document between the co-founders. It's the same. Like,
that's crazy.
That never happens. And I remember Gary Tan, by the way, if you're an entrepreneur, he's got some great videos on building companies. He wrote our first seed check. And I'll never forget, he was like, dude, you got like product market fit for the entire market, like out of the gate. Like, are you going to even have to change anything? He's like, no, we haven't even really changed the product as we've gone from, whether it's Dallas, Texas, or Dallas, Georgia, or it's my neighborhood, that kind of have the exact same product and have had the exact same product for the last 4 years. We've added lots of fancy bells and whistles. It's a much better product, but the core premise of, like, we're going to capture objective evidence. We're going to give it to people who can do something. They're going to arrest people. That will generate positive buzz about the company to sell more cameras, to solve more crimes. Like, there's this really cool chart we have that shows the number of crimes we have solved is a future indicator for the number of cameras we will sell next quarter.
Oh, that's one of your lead indicators. That's very cool.
Yep, exactly.
That's awesome. So I have to ask, I don't know if there's anything you can share, but what's next for Flock? You guys have done such incredible work. You've nailed it right out of the gate. Any exciting stuff that we can expect to see in the future? Yeah,
I mean, our product roadmap is really straightforward. We look at a chart of all the crimes that happen in a city, and we will have a product for every single one. So if you steal a car, we got you. Really good today. If you experience aggravated assault, we don't have a product yet for that. Human to human interaction is something we solve. We got to go build that. You've obviously seen a lot of news around gun violence in America. Homicides have seen an unprecedented uptick since COVID. We've got a product coming out for that in the next couple of weeks. So we kind of just look at the list and say, what are the crimes today? About 70% of all crimes happen with a vehicle. So that's why we started there. But to fill out that product portfolio, we'll continue to build that out. And then for us, we set a very simple North Star as a company that by 2025, we want to see crime in America be reduced by 25%. Last year was not good. Homicides were up a lot. So the way we do that is more cities. We've got 1,400 out of 17,000 cities. We got a lot of land to grab. We have a lot of work to do there. So it's more products, more cities, and then driving more evidence capture for those cities.
Awesome. Well, everyone who's here listening, we're going to go ahead and move into some Q&A. So I know there's already some questions in there. We'll go through that in a second. But if you have questions for Garrett, go ahead and start adding them to not the chat, but the Q&A panel, that tab, and we'll start going through those. So there's some good ones in here. One question is with 2G and 3G network sunsetting, how does that impact flock safety? What happens when the next network sunset?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. Luckily, we are all of our devices are on LTE right now, so we're on 4G. The cool part about the business, particularly for those of the engineering and financial mindset, we actually retain title of all of our equipment, our poles, our cameras, and everything. And so one of the cool kind of secrets of the business, Gary Tan loves to talk about, like, what are the secrets you figured out, is we can deprecate our hardware at the line level on the BOM. So when I think about the next 10 years of our product, I don't do a full swap. Lithium ion batteries, unless, Seth, something I don't know, haven't really changed in a long time. They're not going to change. We can hold that battery for 5 to 7 years. Carrier networks, for the question, those change on a pretty slow cadence. 5G is definitely coming. It's been coming for a long time. 6G will be after that. We can change our modem. That's only a $20 part of the BOM. Image sensors change much faster. So we can actually look at it at an individual level of our bill of materials and say, okay, we're going to upgrade this part for all of our customers in the next 12 months. And that allows us to drive a much faster refresh cycle than your traditional hardware company that's just selling a device. Since we maintain it, we get to manage that. So minimal impact for us. Luckily, all of our devices have been on LTE. We push tens of gigabytes of data per device per month. So we consume a lot of data. So we've been on LTE for a while.
Awesome. Another question. This is kind of similar to one we asked, but we want to get specific. What is the biggest challenge you encountered since starting the company?
Yeah, I think it's probably going to come back to where we started the conversation, which is, what are the unintended consequences of us being successful? And how do I build and employ culture that is proud of what they're doing when there is reasonable doubt and question about, the role of policing in America? And what we do as employees and as team members is say, look, you're either going to be a part of a solution and recognize that it's going to be messy, or you can sit on the sidelines. And so for myself and the 300-ish other people at Flock, we choose to be a part of the solution. Some of us are liberal, some of us are conservative, some voted for Trump, some voted for Biden, some didn't vote at all. We got everyone at Flock because they all believe that they as an individual can contribute to a better society and they want to be a part of it. But finding that narrative and continuing to beat that drum, it's a lot, particularly in a remote first company, our employees are everywhere. I don't get to see them. I don't get to have this kind of talk face to face. It's all via Zoom. And that's definitely been the hardest thing.
Along those same lines, after the George Floyd protests, police backlash, police reform, have you noticed any decline in interest in your technology from the technology departments in purchasing this?
So we've actually seen a pretty big uptick.
Okay.
And I'll explain why, because it might be counterintuitive. I was meeting with a chief in Birmingham, not Birmingham PD, but a suburb of the town. And I was just asking him, how's his experience been, getting general feedback as a good CEO should do. And he told me the thing that he didn't really process was that before Flock, if a 911 call comes in, they say, hey, we're on the lookout for a white Camry. What are they going to do? They're going to pull over every single white Camry. So now you and I, Seth, we might get pulled over. I'm assuming you drive a white Camry. And that's not great. Traffic stops are one of the riskiest things for both a citizen and an officer. It's a very tense environment. With Flock now, we're going to pull over the one white Camry that is the suspect. And so for our police departments and our cities, they recognize that actually with technology, we can reduce the amount of traffic stops that are unnecessary by using technology. And so that is a long way to say, we have found that cities are now seeing a decrease in headcount. No one wants to be a cop. So the only gap fill is technology. And then we can be a double bottom line of, hey, we're going to actually save the city money. We're going to increase the objectivity of that police department. City councils get pretty excited.
I'm curious. This isn't a question that someone asked, but just my own curiosity. Just what you're talking about made me think about, biases in AI and machine learning. I'm curious if you run into any similar issues where, for example, maybe cheaper cars that people in lower socioeconomic areas purchase could be perhaps easier to read or have more dents that are more easily, defining a vehicle fingerprint. Have you run into any issues like that with your data and how you train it?
Yeah, I would say we have seen less issues on the core kind of like ML building and more on the implicated policy. So as an example, I got a question one time from a customer of like, could you build a model for suspicious activity? And I was like, okay, like interesting. What do you mean?
Right.
And he's like, oh, well, a car that has damage, but that has a dealer tag, that's suspicious because you don't buy a new car that has damage. And I was like, okay, that's like kind of suspicious. I don't think we're going to build that because it's not illegal technically to buy a car that has damage. And so where we come into is like, we have to make hard trade-offs because we have an incredible engineering team, predominantly Georgia Tech engineers that can build anything. And the harder question is like, what should we build? And that gets to a pretty like, okay, that's a non-Boolean, non-trivial question to answer. And so in the case of suspicious, like it's pretty easy. It's like, hey, is it illegal? It's not illegal. We're not going to build it. And so that'd probably be the answer.
Yeah, it's a great problem to have when you're such a good team that you can build anything that you have to make more difficult decisions about what you should build. That's a great place to be.
Agree.
I got a good question from Alan. Is there permitting required by some jurisdictions similar to small cell and tower builds in telecom for you guys?
Yes, Alan, I have been shocked at how complicated permitting could be. We, as I mentioned before, we work with about 1,400 cities today across 37 states. The permits in every city and every county and every state are entirely different. Some it's quite straightforward. And in places like Southern California, places like Illinois, it seems like the most complicated thing I've ever experienced. And all we're trying to do is put some poles in the ground. So it's probably similar to a small cell tower. It's less of a construction. Our pole's about 15 feet tall. Device is about 20 pounds, I think, in total. So it's a smaller construction project, but it's still, we got to dig 2 feet deep, 2 feet wide, put concrete in. It's a project.
I didn't realize it was that involved. That's crazy.
There's a whole team that all they do is permits.
Hey, that's why they say hardware is hard, right? It doesn't come with a challenge.
Yeah, bring it some competition.
I think we got one more question, and this will probably be a fun one. Obviously, you've grown so quickly. You had this idea with a couple friends a few years ago. Now you're reducing crime by such a big amount. How have you maintained a great company culture at Flock as you've grown just so rapidly over the past couple of years?
Yeah, so for us, we often ask an interview question, which is, would this person work here for free? We pay everyone market salary, don't get me wrong, we happily pay people, but at this company, it's a lot of hours. It's weird hours, right? Because crime doesn't just work 9 to 5, crime's 24/7. And so we really ask, like, are they deeply committed to the mission? And for us, it's been a super, super consistent filter of if they believe in the mission, if they are excited by it, they're going to want to work here for free. They're going to be excited every day. And it makes my job a lot easier because it's just like, all right, let's just go hire the right people And everything all of a sudden gets a whole lot easier if you have the right people in the seats.
I love that question. I usually ask a similar question, but I usually do it after their first day, which is if I pay you $10,000, it's not a question, it's a deal where I ask people, hey, you've gone through after the first week, they've seen what things are like. Hopefully get an idea of what the culture will be like if it's the right fit. And I give them an offer that I'll give them $10,000 if they want to leave right now, if they think that it's not actually the right job for them, or they can stay. And it's just to kind of balance out the sunk cost and emotional energy that's gone into it. And at least at Crescendo, we had 35 employees, and there was one person who took that once.
Really?
He was very polite. He said, "All right, he said the job isn't for me, but I don't want the money." And I was like, "No, it's part of the deal. You can take it." But I always love to hear kind of those unique policies or traditions or questions that you ask that really help filter out people who are your people and on board with what you're doing. Because it's at the end of the day, it's about the mission and the vision. And if everyone's aligned with the why behind your company, then, well, that's, obviously how to do that because you've built an incredible company behind you. So
I appreciate it. Well, this has been fun, Seth.
Yeah, this has been great. I don't think we have any more questions. Whoops, I accidentally raised my own hand. Jay, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to you.
Yeah, what I was going to say is I thought there was really interesting in one of the podcasts, Garrett, about how you do the vehicle fingerprint, but do people ask you about the contents of the car? You could take pictures of people in the car. So why not just block safety? Do that.
It's a bit of a physics problems. It is hard to build a camera that can both read a license plate at 120 miles per hour, 150 feet away, and then also see through a window without a polarized lens. So typically it's just physics. We just can't, our angle of incident is pretty sharp pointing down to pick up a plate in the vehicle kind of frame. So that's the main reason.
Okay. That was one of the questions. And then the other one, we don't own our license plates. They're the property of the states.
Yeah, fascinating.
I just thought that was interesting in reading up about flock safety.
Yeah, it's a rental. You're just renting it from the state. It's a lease to go drive. That's it. It's not yours.
So what about those bars that have the license plates on the walls, things like that? So
yeah, exactly.
all those places that I've heard about, never been in those. But anyway, we're delighted that you all could join us this afternoon for the discussion. And this has just been great. I've got 5 or 6 pages of notes here. Let me just let everybody know that we want to thank the GTBN leadership. Norm Richardson's the president of Georgia Tech Business Network, and Connor Wynn. I also want to give a shout out to Alan Goloveski. He had a question in there as well. He's the thought leader. He's the one that came up with the idea of for this event. And also thank all the GTBN board members who were able to help with this event. So this was definitely a team lift, and we're glad that everybody could join us this afternoon. The other thing that we ask is thank you for joining us on thank you, Seth. Thank you, Garrett. Thanks, Roshni, for being here. And also all the people that took time out of their day to join us for this webinar. Please stay tuned for upcoming GTBN events. And we're going to send out a survey. We'd love to hear from you, things that we can do better, and get your feedback for upcoming events. So we have a few extra minutes for everybody. Anybody have any closing thoughts, closing words from Seth or Garrett, Roshni?
I guess just thank you to everyone for coming out. I know for me personally, I've done a couple of startups. I've coached, probably over 100 startups through CreateX at Georgia Tech. And every time I interact with another founder, I always learn something new. And hopefully you guys learn something new from Garrett, because it's not every day you get to meet with someone, especially at such a young age, who has built a $1 billion company. That's definitely not an easy feat. So I appreciate you guys coming out, and hope you were able to get at least one helpful thing from this conversation that will help you in your own life.
All right. And thank you, Seth. Thank you, Garrett. And everybody, enjoy the rest of your day. We really appreciate it.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
I
think that's it. All right, cool.
All right. I think we're still recording.
No, bear with me.